Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Be my wife for the evening. I'll pay you triple, the director offered to the poor cleaning lady. She agreed, needing money for her sister's treatment. But when the banker slipped a tricky contract in front of her at the restaurant, she suddenly said, "Dear friends, before we continue, tell us which city you're watching from. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Enjoy the show." Esperanza wiped the glass door surface, the final touch of the evening cleanup on the 12th floor. Her hand moved with mechanical precision and measured circular motions, as if she were performing not a janitor's task but a complex surgical operation. Meanwhile, her mind was elsewhere. Pick up the dress from the tailor's, call her sister to ask about the test results, check whether the rent had gone up again. The office corridor was sinking into dusk. Tall floor-to-ceiling windows let in the last rays of the setting sun, which danced off the polished parquet floor. The executive offices of Iber Capital lined the hallway like silent sentinels, each with a golden nameplate announcing the occupant's name and title. Esperanza knew who sat behind each door, what they did, when they came and left. After 2 years cleaning the 12th and 8th floors of the business center, she knew the executive's routines like the back of her hand. Knew them, but had never crossed paths. A memory floated up, a lecture hall at the law faculty, full of young eyes fixed on her, the smell of chalk, the rustle of pages, and the hush that would fall the moment she began to speak on the intricacies of civil law. Esperanza shook her head, brushing away the unwelcome vision. 15 years of dedicated work, dozens of academic papers, hundreds of graduates, all of it vanished in a moment when the rector signed a restructuring order for the sake of optimization. At the university, the lecture halls had been her refuge from loneliness, from the wounds that hadn't healed even after years. The students, their questions, their bright eyes, filled the void left by 2 unhappy marriages. Her first husband, Natalia's father, left when their daughter was barely 3, just packed up and disappeared, leaving a young graduate student alone with a child and an unfinished dissertation. The second one had seemed like a safe harbor, but soon after the wedding, Esperanza began to notice traces of someone else's lipstick on his shirts, the scent of unfamiliar perfume. She endured it for 10 years, trying to preserve the illusion of family, until one day she heard his voice whispering words of love to another woman, words she herself hadn't heard in years. After the divorce, she lost all faith in men and threw herself completely into work. And then, even that was taken away. She instinctively touched the pocket of her cleaning smock, where an old photograph was tucked away. The corners were frayed, the edges yellowed, but the young faces still looked out with the same clarity. The graduating class of 2012, her last group of law students. The habit of carrying the photo like a talisman had started spontaneously on her first day in this new job. A fragile thread connecting the past with the present. "Esperanza, you still here?" Dolores peeked out from around the hallway corner, wiping sweat from her brow with the sleeve of her uniform. Her round, kind face held an expression of fatigue that even her cheerful smile couldn't hide. "Just finishing up, Dolores." Esperanza called back, folding the rag into the bucket. "You're early today. Already made the whole floor sparkle?" "Oh, my hands don't want to cooperate anymore." Dolores sighed, rubbing her reddened fingers for effect. "Arthritis is flaring up. Maybe it's the weather changing, or maybe it's just age catching up. I'll soon have to strap the broom to my hands to keep it from slipping." Esperanza smiled warmly at her friend. Dolores, who had worked in this building for 12 years, had been her beacon during those early months, showing her all the nooks and shortcuts, where to cut corners and where to pay extra attention, warning her about the boss's quirks. "My grandmother used to find great relief from arthritis with a vodka tincture of marsh cinquefoil," said Esperanza. "She'd rub it in at night, then put on wool gloves. By morning, the pain would be gone. Want me to write down the recipe? You might as well suggest leeches while you're at it." Dolores chuckled, though her eyes sparkled with interest. "Still, go ahead and write it down. At our age, anything's worth trying." The elevator gave a soft ding, and both women instinctively straightened up like soldiers at the command "attention." Right on the dot at 6:30, The company executives began their descent from the upper floors. You could set your watch by them. The doors slid open, revealing two men in impeccable suits. Esperanza instantly recognized Santiago Herrera, the CEO of Iber Capital. She'd seen his portrait in the ground floor lobby and had once watched him give a speech at the company's New Year's party. Up close, though, he looked different, more alive, energetic, with a fine web of wrinkles around his eyes betraying his age despite his youthful appearance. Beside him walked an unfamiliar man, lean, balding, wiry, with a profile that reminded her of a predatory bird. Santiago, as always, you're overestimating the human factor, the stranger was saying, enunciating every word like hammering in nails. This deal is pure math. Emotions have nothing to do with it. There's a human element in every kind of math, Valentine, the director replied calmly. And for a brief moment, his eyes met Esperanza's. She quickly looked away, as was proper, but out of the corner of her eye she saw Santiago slow down slightly, studying the perfectly clean glass door, spotless and gleaming. "Look at your cleaning fairy go," his companion said with a barely concealed smirk. "No wonder you pay that company so well." Though between us, he lowered his voice, but Esperanza still heard him. Less dust means fewer allergies, and I'm about to have a grandson. These days, every second kid has some allergy. They walked on. Their voices faded into the vast hallway. Dolores gave a low whistle. "Did you see that?" Santiago himself, with Valentin Morales from Mediterranean Bank. "Smells like big money to me, I can always tell." Esperanza said nothing as she gathered the cleaning supplies. She had heard such comments too many times to take them personally. A job is a job. The important thing is to do it well. Her apartment greeted her with familiar silence. A one-bedroom flat in a residential district of Madrid, all that remained after the divorce 10 years ago. Still, it was enough for Esperanza. The small space was arranged with meticulous care, an old sofa covered with a knitted throw, a coffee table bearing worn mug rings, bookshelves lining the entire wall. Those shelves held a whole life, dog-eared volumes of legal reference books, textbooks, monographs, folders of academic articles. A complete collection of Cervantes sat next to the Civil Code, and a worn volume of Lorca leaned against a legal linguistics textbook. Esperanza ran her finger along the spines, brushing away invisible dust. These books were the last thing she would ever part with. The phone rang as she reheated yesterday's gazpacho. The screen lit up with Natalia. "Hi, Mom." Her daughter's voice was energetic and just a bit distant, as it had been lately. "How are you? You haven't gotten sick, have you?" "Hello, sweetheart. I'm fine. Just working." Esperanza sat down on a stool, feeling the day's weariness settle into her bones. "How's Alejandro? Have you two decided where you're going this summer?" "The little one's finishing primary school this year. My husband and I are planning to send him to an English camp." "And the older one?" Natalia hesitated. "The older one's applying to law school." "Can you believe it?" Esperanza's heart skipped a beat. Her grandson Miguel was already 17. How quickly time flies. She had given birth to Natalia at just 19, still a student, and her daughter had followed the same path, becoming a mother early too. And now the grandson was planning to apply. 3 generations, and once again, law. "That's wonderful," she said quietly. "And he never talked to me about it." The pause lingered. Esperanza could hear her daughter sigh on the other end. "Mom, you understand, right? He says he wants to learn from practicing lawyers. He's choosing between Complutense University and IE University." Not from a janitor grandmother, Esperanza finished silently what Natalia didn't dare say aloud. "Of course, dear," she said evenly. "Let him choose the best. Maybe you'll come visit for the May holidays? I haven't seen you in so long." "We'll see how things go," Natalia replied evasively. "Listen, Mom," her voice took on a guilty tone, "could you help out a bit with the camp money? It's a great program, but it's turning out to be a bit expensive. The conversation dragged on for a few more minutes: the weather, her son-in-law's job, the new renovation in their 3-bedroom apartment. When the call finally ended, Esperanza sat for a long time staring at the dark phone screen. The gazpacho had gone cold. At the window, a lone fly buzzed, bumping again and again into the invisible glass, not realizing that the barrier was transparent and freedom unreachable. The morning began as usual: an early wake-up, breakfast with a strong cup of coffee, the commute to work. Esperanza was wiping the glass panels in the main corridor, humming an old song to herself. The reflection in the glass showed a short woman in a standard gray uniform, her hair pinned in a bun streaked with silver. Fine lines around her eyes and lips gave her face the look of a delicate sketch, not obvious at first glance, but impossible to miss once you looked closely. The glass panel reflected 2 more figures. Santiago was walking down the hallway with a young man in glasses who was rapidly talking and pointing at something on a tablet. Esperanza stepped aside as she always did when management passed. But this time, something unexpected happened. As Santiago drew level with her, he suddenly slowed his pace. His eyes, attentive, appraising, moved over her face and paused for a second. Then, with an unreadable expression, the director said, "Please come to my office in an hour." Without waiting for a response, he walked on. The young man glanced back at Esperanza with curiosity but said nothing. She stood frozen, cleaning cloth in hand, unable to believe her ears. In 5 years of working at the Centro Empresarial Estrella, not a single executive had addressed her directly, at most, a nod or a curt hola. Usually, it was as if she were just another part of the furniture. Something inside her cracked, like spring ice breaking on a river. Is it a dismissal? Flashed through her mind. Maybe someone complained about the cleaning quality, or it's another round of layoffs. A memory surged. 5 years ago, the rector's office, a cold due to optimization, a signed order, a box of personal belongings carried out of the faculty lounge under the sympathetic gazes of her colleagues. The cloth slipped from her suddenly weakened fingers. Esperanza, Ph.D. in law, former associate professor of civil law, now janitor at Estrella Business Center, bent down to pick it up and noticed her hands were trembling. The CEO's reception area smelled of expensive cologne and coffee. A massive secretary's desk, golden frames on the walls, a soft carpet that muffled every step, everything radiated wealth and confidence, a world utterly foreign to Esperanza. She sat on the edge of a leather couch, feeling completely out of place, like a stain on a pristine white tablecloth. She had taken off her janitor's smock and left it in the supply closet, but her plain blouse and skirt announced her status louder than any uniform ever could. The secretary, a young blonde woman with a stylish haircut, kept casting curious glances at Esperanza over the top of her monitor. Her head must have been spinning with questions. Why would a janitor be summoned by Santiago himself? "Go ahead, Santiago is expecting you," the secretary finally said, nodding toward a dark wooden door. Esperanza discreetly wiped her sweaty palms on her skirt and stood up. From this moment on, the familiar reality seemed to slip out from under her feet, like the deck of a ship in a storm. The office was less ostentatious than she had expected. A strict, minimalist style, very little decor, and a huge window overlooking the city. Santiago sat behind a wide desk, absently turning a silver pen in his fingers. When he saw Esperanza, he put the pen aside and gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Please, have a seat, Esperanza." "Coffee?" "Thank you, no," she replied, her voice calm, though everything inside her had tightened into a knot. It felt strange hearing her name from the CEO's lips. How did he even know it? Had he looked her up, the janitor of the 12th floor? "I have an unusual matter to discuss with you." Santiago leaned back in his chair, studying her face carefully. "And likely an unexpected proposal." Esperanza waited silently, her hands folded neatly in her lap, a posture developed over years of teaching, meant to maintain composure while listening to a student's answer. "Tonight at 7 p.m., I have an important meeting with the leadership of Banco Mediterraneo," Santiago continued. "You saw one of them yesterday, Valentin Morales." The outcome of this meeting will determine the future of a major project for our company. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully, and then said, I need you to accompany me to this meeting as my wife. The words hung in the air, absurd, impossible. Esperanza blinked, thinking she must have misheard. I beg your pardon? I know how it sounds. His voice carried a note of fatigue. But Valentin has a tradition. He prefers to discuss serious deals in an informal setting, and always with wives present. He believes that married men are more trustworthy in business. You want me to pretend to be your wife? Esperanza said in a hoarse voice that didn't sound like her own. A janitor, as the wife of a CEO? A flicker of irritation crossed Santiago's face. This isn't about job titles, he said firmly. I need someone who can carry themselves with dignity in this situation. To everyone else, you'll be Esperanza Herrera, my wife. No one in those circles knows your face. Esperanza felt a wave of indignation rising inside her. 15 years of teaching law, published articles, the respect of her students, and now she was being asked to play a bit part in some business performance, posing as the wife of a man she barely knew. I'm afraid I have to decline, she said, rising from the chair. This is unprofessional and, frankly, degrading. Please sit down, Santiago said unexpectedly gently. I'm not finished yet. Something in his tone made her obey. I didn't choose you by accident, he continued. 2 weeks ago, I saw you help Elena, the legal department's secretary, sort out a document packet. She had mixed up the contract attachments, and you, just walking by, noticed a mistake and showed her how to organize them correctly. Esperanza remembered the incident. The young secretary had been on the verge of tears, poring over the papers for the third time. Esperanza hadn't been able to stay silent. The teacher's instinct to help a struggling student had overridden her fear of overstepping boundaries. There's something about you, something of a true professional, Santiago said, looking her directly in the eye. The way you carry yourself, your refinement, in the good, old-fashioned sense of the word, the quiet dignity so many people in high offices seem to lack. He was speaking sincerely, with respect, not with the pity Esperanza had learned to recognize all too well over the years, but with genuine appreciation. It felt unfamiliar. That's exactly the kind of person I need by my side tonight, he finished. You'll be compensated accordingly, triple pay for one evening. Or name a sum you think is fair. Esperanza slowly ran her hand over her temple, where a small vein pulsed steadily. A fair sum? How do you put a price on your dignity? But then she pictured her sister's tear-streaked face, the clinic bill growing with each day of treatment. Her daughter, asking for help with the summer camp costs. Why me? She asked directly. Surely there are women in your circle more suited to this kind of role. Exactly why, Santiago replied, unexpectedly. Valentin knows almost everyone in my social circle. I can't risk involving someone familiar. He paused, then added in a lower voice. And I had a sense that you possess a certain insight, intuition. Those qualities will be extremely useful tonight. Santiago lowered his gaze to his hands, strong, well-groomed, with a heavy signet ring on the ring finger of his right hand. Esperanza noticed in passing that he wore no wedding ring on the left. I've had my own share of disappointment, he said suddenly, as if responding to a question she hadn't voiced. My ex-wife chose my own business partner over me. Left when things got rough, and when I recovered, tried to come back. But some things just can't be put back together. He looked up abruptly, as if surprised at his own candor. I'm sorry, that's not relevant. I just wanted to explain why I don't have a real wife for events like this. Esperanza looked closely at this man, upright posture, confident gaze, impeccably dressed, and suddenly saw something behind the polished mask of a successful businessman, a loneliness not unlike her own. Was there more desperation or calculation in his proposal? And why was he so certain she could handle it? Maybe it was the fact that, for the first time in 5 years, someone saw her not as a janitor, but as a person, someone with dignity and professionalism. Or maybe it really was the money. Or maybe, deep down, she simply wanted to feel needed again, important. All right, she said at last. I agree. But I'll need different clothes. The relief on Santiago's face was almost tangible. Don't worry about that, he said, glancing at his watch. We've got 3 hours until the meeting. Plenty of time to prepare. Santiago pressed the intercom button. Elena, clear my schedule for the day and get in touch with Igor. Have him bring the car to the main entrance in 15 minutes. Then, glancing at Esperanza, he added, and please find Mrs. Veronica's number. Tell her we'll be there in half an hour. The sleek black executive car glided through the streets of Madrid like a shark in deep water, powerful, confident, streamlined. The driver, wearing a uniform cap, asked no questions and didn't glance in the rearview mirror at his boss's unusual companion. Esperanza watched the storefronts flicker past the window, trying to guess their destination. When the car stopped in front of a 3-story mansion with spiral columns and the gilded letters of a famous fashion house on the facade, she tensed involuntarily. This is too expensive. And inappropriate, she murmured nervously, adjusting her hair. These are business expenses, and absolutely necessary, Santiago cut in, helping her out of the car. Besides, Mrs. Veronica is an old friend. The prices will be reasonable. Reasonable prices? Here, in a temple of elite fashion? That's pure fantasy, Esperanza thought, but there was no point in arguing anymore. Inside the boutique, they were greeted like honored guests, with smiles, compliments, and glasses of cava. A petite woman with sleekly pulled back hair and a flawless chignon hurried to meet them. Santiago, so good to see you. And this must be Esperanza, he hesitated for just a moment, wife. Charming. Mrs. Veronica gave Esperanza a swift, professional once-over, immediately taking in her proportions and sizing. You have a beautiful figure, Senora, and such noble posture. Rare these days. Santiago stepped aside, leaving Esperanza in the hands of the professionals. What followed was almost a surreal performance. Assistants brought out outfit after outfit. Senora Veronica scrutinized every detail. 2 young stylists argued about the right accessories. Esperanza obediently changed, turned before mirrors, lifted her chin on command, rotated left and right, as if she were back in a student theater group. One outfit followed another. An elegant pantsuit, too severe. A black lace dress, too somber. A beige ensemble, too bland. A red dress, too bold. This is it, Senora Veronica suddenly exclaimed when Esperanza tried on a soft sky blue dress with a flawless cut that emphasized her shoulders and gracefully concealed any imperfections. Exactly what we need. The color brings out your eyes, and the fit flatters your figure. It's perfect. The look was completed with low-heeled shoes, minimalist silver jewelry, and a small clutch bag. The final touch, a light silk shawl draped over her shoulders. When Esperanza was led to the full-length mirror, she barely recognized herself. From the glass depths looked out a woman radiating calm confidence and quiet dignity. Not a beauty, her age hadn't disappeared, but a significant presence, a woman with opinions, someone people listened to when she spoke. A woman she might have been, had life turned out differently. Are you pleased? Santiago asked softly, suddenly standing beside her. It's unfamiliar, Esperanza admitted honestly, still looking into the mirror. She tried not to glance at her own clothes, now neatly folded by an assistant. In a few hours, she would return to her real world. This is just a role, she reminded herself. In the car, Santiago was quiet, flipping through documents, making notes, answering calls with short, clipped phrases. Only once, when the car stopped at a red light, did he speak unexpectedly. Do you think it's going to rain? Esperanza looked at the low evening sky, veiled in a thick gray blanket. I don't think so. It's just a storm front. It'll probably pass us by. Santiago nodded as if she had just provided key intel for a business decision, then returned to his papers. Esperanza watched her unexpected husband out of the corner of her eye. He appeared fully absorbed in work, but little signs gave him away. He adjusted his tie knot too often, let his finger rest on the same page a second too long, reread the same line more than once. He was more nervous than he let on. So, the meeting really was important. Santiago, she began carefully, maybe I should know a little more about our cover story. How we met, how long we've been together. He looked up from the papers, and something resembling a smile briefly lit his face. Good point, he replied. We met 7 years ago at a legal conference. Got married a year later. No children. Then Santiago buried himself in his documents again, as if that was all the detail she would need. Esperanza stifled a sigh. Well, this was going to be an interesting evening. Club Alameda was located in an old manor house, lavishly and tastefully restored. Marble columns, crystal chandeliers, antique furniture, paintings in gilded frames, aristocratic luxury, not flashy, but present in every detail. Esperanza walked beside Santiago, trying to appear natural, as if she belonged in such surroundings. The clean lines of the dress gave her confidence, but a tight knot kept rising in her throat. They were greeted by a restaurant host in a tuxedo and escorted to a private dining room where several guests had already gathered. Valentin Morales stood out immediately, tall, wiry, with a sharp gaze and economical movements. Beside him stood a full-figured woman in an expensive but overly ornate dress, presumably his wife. And here comes Santiago with his charming companion. Valentin called out, approaching with a glass in hand. At last you've decided to introduce us to your mysterious other half. Valentin, allow me to introduce my wife, Esperanza, Santiago said in a calm voice. Valentin gave her a curious once-over from head to toe. A pleasure. We were starting to think Santiago had made up a wife to get out of attending social functions. He laughed at his own joke. This is my wife, Margarita. The full-figured woman gave Esperanza a condescending nod, sizing her up with an appraising stare. Her eyes, magnified by thick lenses, resembled two inquisitive pawns. And when did you manage to get married? She asked, placing a sharp emphasis on manage, as though she had caught them in a lie. 7 years ago, Esperanza replied with a soft smile. On the anniversary of our meeting. Oh, how romantic, Margarita drawled, though the doubt in her tone was unmistakable. And where did you two meet? At a legal conference, Esperanza recalled Santiago's words. I was sitting in the front row while Santiago was giving a talk on new trends in corporate law. His speech made quite an impression on me. She allowed herself a quick glance at her husband, who was listening with slight surprise and approval. You know, Esperanza continued, suddenly inspired, he spoke with such passion about legal intricacies, the kind that usually bore people to tears, that I realized I was in the presence of someone truly exceptional. That really is a rare talent, making boring topics sound interesting, Valentin muttered, casting a glance at his wife, who seemed the embodiment of the opposite ability. They were introduced to the other guests, 2 more couples, also connected to the banking industry. Esperanza smiled, answered questions, and made polite conversation, feeling herself slip more and more comfortably into the role with each passing minute. The women eyed her with thinly veiled curiosity. Santiago's wife was clearly not what they had expected, not too young, not too flashy, yet there was something about her, something not of this world. Valentin's gaze kept returning to her, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. Esperanza felt a flicker of unease. This man clearly suspected something, or was planning something. The evening had only just begun, and she still had to play her part to the end, whatever fate had in store around the next bend. The crystal glasses chimed gently to the rhythm of soft music. Esperanza sat upright, her hands folded neatly on her lap beneath a starched linen napkin. How many times had she imagined herself in places like this while looking through glass windows at a world of wealth and confidence, and now she was inside that very display, feeling like a mannequin at someone else's celebration. Thick candles melted in ornate candelabras, their flames casting flickers across the gathered faces. Valentin's face looked predatory, carved from wax. His skin stretched so tightly over his cheekbones it seemed ready to split. He smiled, joked, but his eyes stayed alert, like a seasoned card player watching every move. At the back of the room, a musician plucked gentle chords on a guitar, playing a tune Esperanza recognized from childhood. She sat beside her false husband, and every accidental brush of his hand sent a faint jolt through her, like a quiet electric current. Strange, how quickly the body learns its assigned role. Now, too, she turned toward Santiago and smiled, as though she'd done it 1,000 times before. "How did you come to appreciate the arts?" "You have such refined taste," asked one of the banker's wives, a plump woman in a shimmering gown, her necklace pressing into her full neck like a collar. "Books," Esperanza replied simply. "They open a world much greater than the one we physically inhabit." The woman blinked, caught off guard by the response, and quickly shifted the conversation to more familiar ground. "Have you been to the new spa complex in Los Rosas? They say they brought in mud straight from the Dead Sea." Esperanza nodded, kept the conversation going, smiled. Just like at an academic conference, she reminded herself. She'd attended so many over the years, the banquets and receptions after the formal sessions, where you had to politely chat with colleagues you'd never met before about topics that didn't matter at all. But here, under the carved ceilings of Club Alameda, the atmosphere was different. Beneath the social gloss pulsed an undercurrent of tension. Valentin leaned toward his lawyer more often than etiquette required, whispering in his ear. One of the bankers kept checking his watch, as if waiting for some signal. The men's conversation flowed alongside the women's idle chatter about market indexes, currency fluctuations, and investment prospects. Santiago spoke with confidence, but Esperanza, sitting beside him, could feel how tense his back was, like someone had strung a tight wire deep inside him. She looked at the table, laden with exquisite dishes, and couldn't shake the strange feeling that all these people were performing in some private play, and she had been cast as a silent extra. Then again, she was used to playing other people's roles. For 5 years now, she had been playing the part of a woman who had accepted her fate. "Our youngest just got into Cambridge, can you believe it?" one of the women chirped. Of course, English from the cradle, tutors, educational trips abroad. Esperanza couldn't help thinking of her grandson, his dream of studying law. Choosing between Complutense and IE. If only she could help him, if only she had the means. "And what about your children, Esperanza?" The question pulled her out of her thoughts. "My daughter," she replied, "lives in another city. 2 grandchildren." "How lovely. And what does she do?" Esperanza hesitated for a moment. What would the daughter of a wealthy businessman's wife do? But then she chose not to lie. "She works for a small private company. An economist." "Oh. Economics is wonderful. These days, you can't get by without financial literacy, right?" The conversation drifted on in its usual current. Waiters moved silently between tables, replacing dishes. Dessert time had come. And that's when Valentin made his move. He gave a small nod to his assistant, who pulled several folders from a leather briefcase. "While we wait for dessert and coffee, why don't we take a quick look at the preliminary draft of the agreement?" Valentin said with a smile that promised nothing good. "Might save us time tomorrow at the formal signing." He said it casually, as if offering to share vacation photos, but Esperanza felt Santiago freeze beside her for a moment. This was a breach of the unspoken protocol, business documents at a social dinner, without prior coordination. Copies of the contract were distributed to the men. One copy, apparently by oversight, landed near Esperanza's wine glass. A slim stack of stapled pages, and within it, possibly, a trap. The men leaned in to read. The women continued chatting. Esperanza, almost absently, flipped through a few pages. The legal text flowed before her like a familiar landscape. After so many years of teaching, she read such documents like open books. Her eye quickly caught key phrases, wording patterns. By the 5th page, she slowed. Something in the phrasing of the collateral clause scraped at her professional instinct. She reread the paragraph, cross-referenced it with the appendix, and a chill settled in her chest. If she was reading it correctly, the contract contained a cunning loophole. Under a certain chain of events, Santiago's company would lose control over a significant portion of its assets. I see your wife has an interest in legal minutiae. Valentine's voice suddenly rang out, or is she just admiring the pretty paper? Esperanza looked up and met his sharp gaze. There was a smirk lurking at the corners of the banker's mouth. Santiago tensed slightly beside her but maintained a pleasant expression. Esperanza and I share many interests, Santiago said evenly. How sweet, Valentine drawled, eyes still locked on Esperanza. And what, may I ask, caught your wife's attention in our boring little contract? Silence fell over the table. The women stopped speaking, the men looked up from their pages. All eyes turned to Esperanza. She felt her heart begin to race. And then, a familiar sensation returned. That moment from her university days, standing before a full lecture hall, mind blank. But then, the first word comes, then the second. And suddenly, the thought is clear. The voice, steady. There's a strange clause in the collateral section, she said after a brief hesitation. Clause 14.3 contradicts the appendix regarding asset disposition. She flipped the page and pointed to a specific paragraph. Here, it refers to the creditor's preferential right to the assets listed in Appendix 3 in case of delays in project financing. But if you look at the appendix itself, the list of assets is far broader than what's described in the main text. In fact, it includes production facilities that aren't directly related to the current project. Valentine's face froze like a porcelain mask. Santiago cast a quick glance at the referenced section of the document, his eyebrows rising slightly. More than that, Esperanza felt something awaken within her, the long-forgotten thrill of professional engagement. The fulfillment term is also inconsistent with current banking regulations, she continued. According to last quarter's ruling from Banco de España, those deadlines have been revised. As it's written here, even if the payment schedule is followed precisely, the borrower could still technically be considered delinquent. A heavy, ringing silence fell over the room. Esperanza could hear the pounding of her own heart. In her peripheral vision, she saw Santiago slowly straighten in his chair, his hand on the table curling into a fist. "You're familiar with banking law?" one of Valentine's lawyers asked cautiously, a young man in glasses, with a perfectly knotted tie. "I just read carefully," Esperanza replied modestly, though her voice had changed. The uncertainty of a mere guest was gone, replaced by the firm, measured tone honed over years of lectures and seminars. "There are a few more inconsistencies," she added, flipping through the pages. For example, in the section on penalties, there's a reference to Appendix 5 for the indexation formula, but that appendix contains a multiplier that makes the penalty disproportionately high compared to the principal. Also, the arbitration clause names an institution that was reorganized last year. The stunned stillness around the table shifted into a ripple of movement. The bankers exchanged looks, the lawyers frowned, and the wives glanced at their husbands in bewilderment. Valentine looked as if he had just bitten into something sour, but quickly composed himself. Santiago, gradually regaining his composure, took the lead. "I think we should take a closer look at these points," he said evenly. "It's possible some technical errors slipped in." "Of course," Valentine replied with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just a few unfortunate typos. We'll have the documents corrected by tomorrow's signing." With a curt gesture, Valentine signaled his assistant to collect the copies. The young man hurriedly gathered the papers into his briefcase, avoiding eye contact with anyone. "And here comes dessert," Margarita announced with exaggerated cheer as waiters entered the room with silver trays. But the celebratory atmosphere had vanished for good. Conversation faltered, jokes fell flat. Esperanza felt the weight of lingering stares, but now they looked at her differently, with puzzlement and, was it respect? The evening ended earlier than planned. Everyone suddenly remembered urgent matters, early meetings, and the need to check on children. As they said their goodbyes, Valentine gave Santiago a firm handshake and offered Esperanza a curt nod. "A very enlightening evening," Valentine said with an unreadable expression. "I hope tomorrow your legal team will present a more competent version of the agreement." Outside Club Alameda, Esperanza felt the tension that had held her taut all evening begin to release. The night air cooled her flushed face. Snippets of legal phrases and contract language whirled in her mind, mingled with memories of lecture halls where she used to unravel similar legal puzzles for her students. Silence settled in the car. Santiago stared out the window at the rushing lights of nighttime Madrid. Esperanza sat upright, hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl. The cabin smelled of expensive leather and a faint trace of cologne. "Who are you?" Santiago finally asked without turning his head. His voice sounded distant, as though coming through deep water. Esperanza took a deep breath. It was time to take off the mask. "I taught civil law for 15 years at the university," she said simply. "I was an associate professor, working on my doctorate. After the university restructured, our department was shut down. At my age, with no commercial experience, no one wanted to hire me in the field. But I had to live somehow. So," she trailed off. What more could be said? A typical story for a woman of her generation, one of those left behind in the whirlwind of change. Too old to start over, too young to give up. "You saved the deal," Santiago said after a long pause. Those typos, as Valentin called them, could have cost the company millions. He spoke calmly, matter-of-factly, like summarizing a routine business meeting. No shock, no indignation, and, most importantly, none of the pity Esperanza had feared most. "The payment will be transferred to your account tomorrow," he added. "The amount will reflect the value of your service." Esperanza nodded. After all, it had been a transaction. She had played her part and delivered more than anyone expected. The car pulled up to her building, a gray 5-story block with peeling plaster and dim windows, a world away from chandeliers and marble staircases. "Thank you," Santiago said, turning toward her for the first time during the ride. "For everything." Their eyes met, the dark, focused gaze of a successful businessman and the tired, but still bright eyes of a woman who had seen far too much of life. "Thank you for the opportunity," she replied, reaching for the door handle. "It was nice to feel useful again." "As agreed, the triple salary will be transferred tomorrow," he added. "You've more than earned it." Stepping out of the car, Esperanza paused for a moment under the yellow glow of a street lamp. In her elegant dress, with her hair perfectly styled, she looked like a visitor from another world, someone who had accidentally wandered into this modest residential neighborhood. Santiago watched her until she disappeared into the building. Walking down the familiar hallway, where she knew every crack in the walls, Esperanza felt a strange lightness, as if something long dormant inside her had begun to awaken, stretch, stir, unfurl its wings. Something she hadn't let herself name in years: hope. The money arrived the next day. The amount flashing on the SMS notification, triple her monthly salary, made Esperanza reread it several times in disbelief. She hadn't held that kind of money in her hands since she won a university award for Best Academic Paper of the Year. 3 months janitor pay, for one evening. "Thank you for your cooperation," the payment note read. Dry. Official. Anonymous. Not a trace of what had passed between them, in that moment of clarity, when she had felt truly, completely herself again. The 2 weeks following that memorable evening passed outwardly as usual, the same hallways, the same offices, the same scent of cleaning detergent that had sunk so deeply into Esperanza's skin no hand cream could remove it. She scrubbed glass doors, washed floors, wiped down stair railings, everything just as before. But inside her, a spring flower was blooming, pushing through the frozen soil of a long winter, as if someone had thrown open a window in a stuffy room and fresh air had rushed in, bringing with it forgotten scents and long-lost sounds. In the evenings, she took out her worn textbooks, reread old lecture notes, and made extracts. On the old laptop she had once bought to prepare her lectures, she browsed legal websites, followed legislative changes, read new articles in legal journals. To her surprise, she hadn't missed all that much. The fundamental principles of law remained unchanged. Like riding a bicycle, The pedals turn, the chain moves, the wheels spin, and you're moving forward, wondering how you ever feared you'd forgotten. "You look younger lately," Dolores remarked one afternoon as they had lunch together in the janitor's closet. "Your eyes are shining, your posture straighter. Don't tell me you've fallen in love at your age." Esperanza laughed, feeling her cheeks flush with color. "Oh, stop it, Dolores. At my age, falling in love is just a way to make people laugh." "And why not?" her friend pressed on, squinting mischievously. "You're a good-looking woman, single, and as the classic says, love is for all ages." "You've been reading too many of those romance novels," Esperanza waved her off. "Nothing like that. I'm just finally getting enough sleep." But Dolores remained skeptical. After 12 years working in the business center, she'd seen all kinds of people, and she knew how to read the things they tried to hide on their faces. Something told her that something significant was happening with Esperanza. "Well, all right," she said at last, sipping coffee from her thermos. "God willing, may your eyes keep shining like that." Her sister noticed the change too when Esperanza called her that evening. Even through the phone, she picked up on something different in her voice. "I promise, Carmen," Esperanza said, gripping the pencil she'd been using to jot notes in her calendar, "in 3 days, I'll bring the full amount. The doctor said if we start treatment now, there's a good chance of full recovery." "Where did you get that kind of money, Esperanza?" Her sister's voice was full of equal parts hope and worry. "You didn't borrow it from some bankers, did you? The interest they charge these days, you'll never pay it back." "Unexpected bonus at work," Esperanza replied, surprised at how easily the half-truth slipped from her lips. "You know, sometimes life hands you pleasant surprises. What matters now is your health. Money? One day it's gone, the next it's there." Her sister cried into the phone, thanked her again and again, promised to get better, spoke of how Esperanza had always been the strong one, first pulling their parents through hardship, then her husband, and now her. Esperanza listened, eyes closed, and felt something inside begin to thaw, like spring arriving after a long, long winter. The next morning, as she was wiping down the railings of the central staircase, the lobby administrator, a young man with a perfectly styled haircut and a practiced smile, approached her. "Esperanza," he said in an official tone, as if announcing a VIP guest, "a note for you from Santiago. He asked that it be delivered to you personally." He handed her a thick paper envelope. Esperanza instinctively wiped her hands on her apron before taking it, and noticed the young man raise an eyebrow ever so slightly, clearly surprised that the CEO was sending handwritten notes to a janitor. Inside the envelope was a sheet bearing the Iber capital emblem at the top. Just a few lines, written in bold, masculine handwriting. "I would appreciate it if you could stop by my office today after the end of your shift. Santiago Herrera." Her heart began to race, just like in her youth, before an important exam or her very first lecture. What could he possibly want? Another role to play? Or perhaps he simply wanted to revisit that evening, to make sure she hadn't said a word to anyone. The day dragged on endlessly. Dolores noticed her distraction but chose not to ask questions. Everything in its time. After her shift ended, Esperanza changed into her usual work clothes, a dark blue knit suit, a white blouse, and comfortable low-heeled shoes. Simple but neat, the kind of outfit meant to blend in, to remain invisible. The secretary ushered her into the office immediately, clearly she had been warned. Santiago stood by the window, gazing out at the evening city. When he heard the door open, he turned. "Thank you for coming," he said simply, gesturing toward the guest chair. "You wanted to see me?" Esperanza replied, settling onto the edge of the chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, a habit formed during years of lecturing. Without a word, Santiago placed a folder of documents in front of her. "I'd like your opinion," he said, sitting across from her. "Informally, of course. Just a second opinion." Esperanza opened the folder. Inside was a draft agreement for the creation of a joint venture. Her eyes scanned the text quickly, picking out the key clauses, cross-referencing terms, analyzing the language. "The liability clause is flawed," she said, pointing to the relevant section. It references applicable legislation, but in such vague terms that the definition of liability becomes essentially meaningless. She flipped through the pages, commenting, marking passages, as if reviewing a student's paper. The same fingers that had just held a mop now moved confidently over legal documents. The voice that had echoed only in empty corridors now spoke with steady, professional precision. Santiago listened intently, making notes in his notebook, no unnecessary questions, no signs of surprise or doubt. He spoke to her as an equal. For the first time in many years, someone saw her not by her age or her job title, but as a professional. "Brilliant analysis," he said when she finished. "Exactly what I suspected. Our legal department considers the document flawless, but I had a feeling there were hidden pitfalls." He paused, as if gathering his thoughts, then looked her straight in the eye. "I have a proposal, Esperanza. I'd like to continue working with you on a regular basis. Off the record, of course, perhaps once a week, whenever it's convenient for you. You'd review documents, offer evaluations, note any issues. Confidentially, of course." Esperanza felt her heart race again. Conflicting thoughts raced through her mind. On one hand, it was a flattering offer, her knowledge and experience were finally being valued again. On the other, it meant a double life, secrets, the need to lie to her colleagues. But then she saw her sister's tear-streaked face in her mind, the clinic bill waiting to be paid. Her daughter, asking for help with her grandson's summer camp. "I agree," she said quietly. "But I'll need time to refresh my knowledge in some areas. Legislation keeps evolving." "Of course," Santiago nodded. "I can arrange access to our legal database. Or, if it's easier, we can install the necessary software on your home computer." "I have a laptop," Esperanza replied. "Old, but still functional." Santiago gave a faint smile. "Then we'll provide you with a new one, as a work tool." They discussed the details, meeting times, payment arrangements, confidentiality. Everything was clear, professional, free of unnecessary emotion. When Esperanza stood to leave, he unexpectedly asked, "How is your sister? I remember you mentioned her illness." Esperanza looked at him in surprise. He remembered. That night, she had mentioned her sister in passing, just a brief remark, but he had remembered. "She's facing serious treatment," she replied. "But now we have a chance." He nodded without saying another word. But that nod carried weight, understanding, approval, something else she couldn't or didn't want to interpret just yet. That evening, her daughter called. Natalia sounded cheerful. Her older son had scored high on his practice exams, and his chances of getting into university were growing. "Can you believe it, Mom? His teacher said he has a real knack for law," she laughed into the phone. "Takes after his grandmother." Esperanza found herself smiling. Not long ago, those words would have stung with bitterness, but now they carried hope. "By the way, I wanted to talk to you," Natalia added, sounding more serious. "About the money for the little one's camp. My husband and I decided we'll manage it ourselves. Your salary's not exactly huge." "It's all right," Esperanza answered gently. "I've taken on a bit of extra work. It's not much, but I enjoy it." "What kind of work?" Natalia asked, concern in her voice. "Don't tell me you've taken on more cleaning. You're already exhausted." "Don't worry," Esperanza replied vaguely. "It's more intellectual than physical. I'll tell you more someday." She heard Natalia inhale, no doubt ready to fire off more questions. But at that moment, a child's scream rang through the line, and her daughter hurriedly ended the call with an apology. And so began her double life. By day, the same mop and bucket, the same familiar routines. But in the evenings, a different Esperanza hunched over legal documents, making notes, checking wording, verifying legislative references. Her weekly meetings with Santiago became part of her new reality. Days passed. Then weeks. Then months. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the way people treated her began to change. The security guard at the front desk now gave her a friendly nod as she passed. Santiago's secretary greeted her first, instead of pretending not to notice her. Even the stern business center administrator once held the elevator door for her. Something was changing in Esperanza, too. Her shoulders straightened, her movements grew more confident, her gaze clearer, as though a dull, dusty film was slowly lifting, revealing the vibrant colors beneath. Each morning, when she put on her gray janitor's coat, she knew it was just that, a coat, a disguise. Inside, the heart of a professional still beat strong, a mind once again in demand, her skills and knowledge once again of use. That knowledge warmed her like a small candle, a flame bright enough to light even the darkest room. And with each passing day, it grew brighter. She no longer feared being noticed. Rumors spread invisibly, like mold in dark corners. By the end of the second month of her unofficial collaboration with Santiago, whispers had begun to circulate around the Iber Capital office. No one had paid attention to the janitor before, gray uniform, modest movements, eyes that always looked past. But now they noticed something else. Every Wednesday, like clockwork, Esperanza rode the elevator to the 12th floor and disappeared into the CEO's office, a door most staff wouldn't dare approach directly. An hour or so later, she would emerge, upright, eyes sparkling. And after these meetings, even Santiago, usually reserved, sometimes looked almost inspired. Confusion, curiosity, envy, people are quick to explain the unexplainable in the simplest, most primitive way. After all, what could an older cleaning woman possibly be doing alone in the office of a powerful man? In the hallways, smoking areas, and cafeteria, theories rustled like dry leaves, each one more ridiculous than the last. That morning, Esperanza entered the women's restroom on the 8th floor to replace a towel. Hearing voices, she froze. They were talking about her. "Did you see how often she goes to his office?" chirped a young voice. "And always outside working hours. Yesterday she came out all flushed. I nearly fell out of my chair." "No kidding," added another, lower voice. "Turns out our chief isn't that picky after all. I thought he only went for models." "What do you think she—" The end of the sentence was drowned in muffled laughter. Esperanza's cheeks burned as if scalded with boiling water. She stood pressed against the wall, feeling something inside her turn cold and coil into a tight spiral. A long-forgotten emotion surged, humiliation. She pushed open the stall door and stepped out to the sinks, where two young secretaries in fashionable suits were touching up their makeup. Seeing her reflection in the mirror, they fell silent mid-sentence. An awkward, ringing pause filled the room. Esperanza calmly washed her hands, dried them with a paper towel, tossed the crumpled piece into the bin, and only then looked up to meet their eyes. "You know," she said quietly, with the calm dignity of a professor addressing first-year students, "I always told my students, the most dangerous thing in the world isn't ignorance. It's ignorance combined with arrogance. I hope it's not too late for you to learn that." She walked out without looking back, leaving the two girls frozen in place. She had worn that same look long ago, when whispers followed her through the university halls, rumors that she had earned her associate professorship through an affair with the vice-rector. She had walked tall then too, head held high, back straight, just as she had once taught her female students. Respect begins with how you carry yourself. Outwardly composed. Inside crushed. Didn't she know, from the very beginning, where this would lead? Didn't she understand that her world and Santiago's could never intersect without consequences? "Santiago, I need to speak with you frankly." In the CEO's office, Eduardo Vargas looked composed and resolute. At 45, he headed the legal department of one of the country's top investment firms, the result of a long climb up the corporate ladder, each rung earned with blood and sweat. "I'm listening," Santiago replied evenly, setting aside his documents. "It's about your consultations with the cleaning woman," Eduardo began, carefully choosing his words. "Rumors are spreading through the office. All kinds of rumors. It's undermining corporate discipline and, forgive my bluntness, your personal authority as a leader." Santiago looked at his subordinate with a calm, appraising expression. Eduardo was regarded as one of the best corporate lawyers in the city, but he had a quality Santiago couldn't stand: self-importance bordering on arrogance. "I know the rumors you're referring to," Santiago said. "But I can assure you, my relationship with Esperanza is strictly professional. She assists me with document analysis." Eduardo raised an incredulous eyebrow. "Document analysis? The janitor?" "Sometimes," Santiago replied calmly, "you need someone who can see what we all miss, someone not warped by professional bias. She sees things differently." Eduardo pressed his lips together, trying to contain his irritation. Santiago's words sounded like a direct rebuke to his department. "A cleaning lady analyzes legal documents? Are you serious?" he said, his voice cracking with disbelief. "She's a former law professor," Santiago admitted reluctantly, realizing there was no longer any point in keeping it secret. Eduardo froze, stunned by the revelation. He took a few seconds to process it before blurting out, openly skeptical, "Then why is she mopping floors instead of working in our department? And why doesn't anyone know about her qualifications?" Santiago said nothing. From the 12th floor window, he could see the autumn park below, golden leaves swirling in the air, blanketing the paths like a carpet. So much fading beauty, he thought, not without melancholy. So many untapped talents around us. "For now, I ask that you keep our collaboration confidential," Santiago said finally. "It's better for everyone this way." Eduardo gave a reluctant nod, but deep inside, a quiet resentment was growing. He, a seasoned professional with 20 years of experience, was being undermined, compared to some former lecturer who had spent 5 years cleaning floors and was now acting as the CEO's secret legal advisor. The thought smoldered like a burning coal, refusing to go out. The hospital walls, painted a dull mint green, looked as faded as overwashed linens. Esperanza walked down the corridor toward her sister's room, breathing in the familiar smell of antiseptics and medicine. Under her arm she carried a bag of fruit, in her purse, her latest consultation fee. "The test results show positive progress," the doctor said, a gray-haired man with kind, tired eyes. "If this continues, we can discharge your sister for outpatient care in a month." Esperanza nodded, doing her best to hold back tears of relief. Just 2 months earlier, she and her sister had sat in this same office hearing very different predictions. "I don't know how you got the money, Esperanza, but you saved me," Carmen whispered once they were alone in the room. "I was already preparing for the worst." "Nonsense," Esperanza replied firmly, placing grapes and apples on the bedside table. "You'll be chasing after great-grandkids before you know it." They talked about everything: Carmen's grandchildren, the old village house that had stood empty since spring, the neighbors keeping an eye on it. Esperanza told stories about her daughter and grandchildren, but not a word about her job, no mention of mops and buckets, no hint of legal consultations. "You've changed, little sister," Carmen said suddenly, steadying her face. "Your eyes shine like they did when you were young, like you've been reborn." Esperanza only smiled. How could she explain this strange metamorphosis, this unexpected turn in her fate? A miracle that arrived so rarely, and so inconveniently. Her daughter lived in a relatively new residential neighborhood, in a typical apartment building with a playground just outside. Esperanza came over on Saturday morning, for the first time in a long time, with a light heart. In her bag were gifts for the grandchildren, in her pocket, money to pay for the summer camp Natalia had mentioned. They drank coffee in the kitchen, bright and spacious, with floral curtains on the windows. Natalia, who resembled Esperanza in her youth, the same serious brown eyes, the same slight head tilt when listening, talked about work, her husband, the children. For the first time in years, there was no tension between them, no invisible but ever-present wall of unspoken grievances and long-festering wounds. "You've changed, Mom," Natalia remarked suddenly, pouring her a third cup of coffee. "It's like you're a professor again." Esperanza gave a noncommittal smile, but her heart began to beat faster. Was it really so obvious? Could the changes inside her already be showing, like spring streams seeping through thawing snow? "Nonsense," she said, waving it off. "I finally got some proper sleep, that's all." But her daughter looked at her doubtfully. Natalia had always been observant and sensitive, a trait she'd inherited from her mother, though she used it not for analyzing legal texts, but understanding people. The grandchildren burst into the kitchen like a whirlwind, the older one, nearly a young man now, bearing a striking resemblance to his grandfather, and the younger, a tousled imp with bright eyes and freckles. They surrounded their grandmother, talking over each other, excitedly sharing news about school, friends, and plans. The older one spoke passionately about preparing for law school, the books he'd been reading, the practice tests he'd taken. Listening to him, Esperanza felt a sharp, almost physical sensation of continuity, a thread stretched across generations, connecting them despite all the breaks and bends of fate. "This contract is absolutely flawless," Eduardo said, tapping his pencil against the glossy folder. "We've reviewed every clause, every comma. It's perfect." A meeting was underway in the conference room to finalize a strategically important agreement. Around the long dark wood table sat department heads, financial officers, and legal staff. The air was heavy with tension. "Even so," Santiago said, leaning back in his chair, "I'd like one more person to review it." Eduardo gripped his pencil until his knuckles turned white. "You mean Esperanza?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Exactly," Santiago nodded calmly. Eduardo straightened, stiff as a board. "With all due respect, this is an insult to my department. We've spent a week on this document." "I appreciate your team's work," Santiago replied gently. "But a second pair of eyes never hurts." "In that case," Eduardo said, rising from his seat, "invite her in. Let her review it in front of everyone. I'm genuinely curious what a cleaning lady might find in a text prepared by seasoned professionals." His tone carried a clear challenge, barely concealing his irritation. Santiago paused, then nodded. "Very well. Please call Esperanza." When she entered the conference room, dressed in her usual simple but neat clothes, the chatter died instantly. Dozens of eyes turned to her with unconcealed curiosity. Someone scoffed. Someone else whispered to a neighbor. Esperanza felt a chill run down her spine, but she stood tall, composed, and dignified. "Esperanza, would you please review this document?" Santiago said, handing her the folder. "Especially the section on guarantees and termination conditions." She took the folder and sat in the offered chair. The room was silent, the only sound the faint rustle of pages being turned. Eduardo watched her with thinly veiled contempt. 10, 15, 20 minutes passed. Esperanza's face remained unreadable, but inside, unease was building. The document was indeed masterfully drafted, not a single loose thread, not a single flaw in the wording. Eduardo had outdone himself. But on page 27, her eyes landed on something odd, minor, almost imperceptible, but potentially dangerous. In the force majeure section, there was a reference to a clause that contradicted international standards. In the event of unforeseen disasters or economic shocks, the company could lose the right to claim compensation. "I found a discrepancy," she said quietly, lifting her eyes from the document. "On page 27, in the section about force majeure circumstances." Eduardo straightened abruptly, as if struck. "Nonsense. We checked that section especially thoroughly. See for yourself," Esperanza continued in the same calm tone. "It references a UN convention, but in the version that's no longer in force. After last year's amendments, the terms changed. Now, in case of force majeure, a party is entitled to partial compensation even if obligations were only partially fulfilled." Santiago took the document and checked the indicated section. Eduardo, leaning over the table, feverishly flipped through his copy. His face slowly shifted from pale to crimson. "She's right," Santiago said slowly. "The reference is outdated. Under current economic conditions, this could have cost the company millions." Eduardo double-checked the text, and with each passing second, the truth became clearer. She was absolutely right. But instead of gratitude, a surge of fury welled up in him. He, the head of the legal department, had just been publicly corrected. And by whom? A cleaning lady? Well, he muttered through clenched teeth, I'm glad we have such a meticulous consultant. Though I'm not sure why the company needs a legal department at all if key decisions are made by support staff. Eduardo, Santiago said sharply, warning in his tone. But Eduardo was past stopping. She's not even a practicing lawyer, just a former lecturer who's been mopping floors for 5 years. And you place her judgment above that of an entire professional department? A heavy silence fell over the room. All eyes turned to Esperanza. She sat motionless, upright as a string, her face perfectly composed. Only her eyes, dark and deep with old pain, betrayed her feelings. This discussion is over, Santiago said firmly. Make the necessary corrections. We'll resume the meeting tomorrow. The room began to empty. Employees left, murmuring quietly among themselves. Esperanza slowly stood, feeling the weight in her chest grow heavier. Eduardo stood in the doorway, blocking her path. It's either her or me, he said in a low voice, just loud enough for Santiago to hear. I won't work for a company where a janitor tells lawyers how to draft contracts. And he left without waiting for an answer. Esperanza understood everything without a word. She had seen this before, back at the university, when her department was shut down due to internal politics. She knew exactly how such confrontations ended for people without influence or position. I'll hand in my resignation, she said quietly, from the cleaning service. Today. Don't rush to conclusions, Santiago replied quickly. Eduardo will calm down. But they both knew what had happened couldn't be erased like chalk from a blackboard. Rumors about her past and her unofficial work with the director were already spreading through every floor of the business center. Dolores burst into tears when Esperanza told her she had decided to quit. Where will you go now, dear? Dolores wailed, wiping her eyes with the corner of her apron. Don't tell me you found something better? It's just time to move on, Esperanza smiled, hugging her friend around the shoulders. You know how it is, at our age, we can't afford to stand still. On her last day of work, she thoroughly cleaned all her floors, returned her supplies, said goodbye to her colleagues, and walked toward the exit of the business center with a light heart, as if shedding a heavy burden she had carried for far too long. The lobby was unusually busy. Security guards stood at attention, and administrators bustled about, preparing to receive an important guest. Esperanza slowed her steps when she saw a familiar lean figure with a hawkish profile. Valentin Morales, deputy chairman of the board at Banco Mediterraneo, had come in person to visit the Iber Capital office. He stood in the lobby, animatedly discussing something with Santiago. When he saw Esperanza, Valentin unexpectedly broke off the conversation. There she is, he exclaimed, his voice warm with unexpected enthusiasm. The very woman who saved our deal. A silence fell around them. Staff members froze, not believing what they were hearing. The banker, about whom legends were whispered, was addressing the cleaning lady? I've come with an important proposal, Valentin continued, ignoring the stunned faces. Our bank is ready to finance a major Iber Capital project, but on one condition: all documentation must be reviewed by the same expert who won't let a single error slip past. He bowed to Esperanza with sincere respect. I came in person to express my admiration for your professionalism. In our world, such meticulousness is worth its weight in gold. Esperanza stood in the middle of the lobby, clutching a bag with her belongings from the cleaner's locker, feeling as if reality was shifting and blurring around her. Was this a dream, or was fate finally offering her a long overdue gift? Out of the corner of her eye, she spotted Eduardo. He stood frozen near the elevator, staring in disbelief at what was happening. His face was slowly turning the same shade as it had in the conference room, crimson with a bluish undertone. Valentin went on, talking about project prospects and new horizons for cooperation. Santiago listened with an unreadable expression, occasionally casting brief glances at Esperanza. In those glances, she saw something she was almost afraid to admit: hope. When the doorbell pierced the quiet of the morning, Esperanza froze with her coffee cup in hand. Who could be visiting at 9:30 on a Thursday? Her neighbor Pilar usually knocked. The mailman wasn't due with her pension for another week. She opened the door and stood still on the threshold. Santiago stood there, in a sharp dark gray suit, holding a small folder, as if he had stepped straight out of another world into her worn-out apartment. "Good morning, Esperanza," he said with slight hesitation, glancing at the narrow hallway with its cracked paint. "Forgive the intrusion. May I come in?" She instinctively straightened her robe and smoothed down her hair, a silvering tangle she hadn't had time to fix. On the coffee table in the living room lay newspapers with job ads circled in red marker. It had been 2 days since she left the business center, and she had spent those days calling potential employers. Yesterday alone, she'd contacted 3 cleaning companies, all of them invited her for an interview. Life went on, awkward and relentless. "Come in," she stepped aside to let him pass, and the cramped kitchen immediately felt implausibly small, as if a butterfly had fluttered into a matchbox. "Coffee?" "Thank you." He sat on the edge of a stool, set the folder on the table, placed his phone beside it, and sat quietly for a moment, breathing in the bittersweet aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the scent of old books lining the shelf by the window. "I've come with a proposal." Esperanza leaned against the sink, trying to hide the slight trembling in her knees. For the past 2 days since leaving the business center, she had tried not to think about what had happened, focusing instead on her job search. But at night, when the silence thickened like syrup, Santiago's face would rise before her, the look of surprise and admiration in that unforgettable conference room. "I need someone for the position of special legal risk consultant," he said without preamble. "With a respectable salary, flexible hours, and full benefits, of course." He opened the folder and placed a draft employment contract in front of her. "You're offering me a job? An official one?" Esperanza ran her fingers over the flawlessly printed text, unable to believe her eyes. "But your lawyers won't like this." After the incident with Valentin, the situation changed. Santiago clasped his hands in front of him, the way he always did when making important decisions. Banco Mediterraneo set a condition: all documentation for the new project must carry your approval. And this project is too important to risk. He paused, as if choosing his next words carefully, and added, "I spoke with Eduardo." Behind Santiago's glass office doors, a sullen Eduardo was turning over a personalized pen, a birthday gift from the company. "I understand your frustration," Santiago said, pacing the room. But Valentin was absolutely clear: without her involvement, the project won't get funded. "That's 1.5 billion euros, Eduardo." The head of the legal department grimaced as if he had bitten into a lemon. "I can't work on the same team with that, with Esperanza. It's humiliating." "We'll create a special position," Santiago explained patiently. "Outside the hierarchy of the legal department. She'll only review finalized documents as an independent expert. No interference with your team's workflow. But everyone will still know. They'll talk about the janitor lawyer, about how she found the mistake. That mistake could have cost us millions." Santiago's face hardened, turning almost unfamiliar. "You can hate Esperanza all you like, but let's face it, she's saved this company from major losses twice. She's not one of us." Eduardo lowered his voice. "She's not from our world. Have you seen where she lives, the conditions, how she speaks? That's a different world, Santiago." "Which is exactly why she's so valuable," Santiago replied firmly. "Her perspective isn't clouded by what you call our world. And by the way, I've heard how she speaks, with a dignity and clarity many in our so-called circle could envy." Eduardo was silent for a long moment, tapping the pen on the desk, then finally muttered, "I'll think about your proposal." Esperanza looked out the kitchen window, where the branches of an old chestnut tree swayed gently, silent witnesses to her childhood, youth, adulthood, and the slow encroachment of old age. Her whole life she had looked at that tree. First from below, then eye to eye, when her family's apartment was separated from the communal flat and the old staircase leading to the window became theirs alone. The chestnut had never given up, clinging to the meager city soil, surviving in defiance of time. Just like her. "I'll be able to work in my field again," she said quietly, without turning around. And help my sister. That matters. So you're accepting the offer? His voice sounded slightly muffled, as if coming from underwater. Yes, she nodded firmly. On one condition. Which is? No special treatment. I have to meet the standards of the position like anyone else. Santiago allowed himself a faint smile. I assure you, Esperanza, when 1.5 billion euros are at stake, no one is thinking about special treatment. The lobby of Centro Empresarial Estrella greeted Esperanza with the indifferent hum of voices, the rustle of paper, and the ringing of phones. She walked past glass partitions, security guards, receptionists, and clerks. She wore that same soft blue suit she once bought for the role of a wife, the one she had carefully preserved in her closet, a reminder of that strange, magical day when she had felt human again. Only now, she wasn't playing a role. Esperanza, called the young man at reception, the same one who used to barely nod at her. Your access badge is ready. A plastic card with her photo and the title Esperanza. Special legal risk consultant, a small rectangle containing her new life. On the 7th floor, next to Santiago's office, a small room awaited her, bright, with a view of the morning city, a brand new computer on the desk, and bookshelves still empty, waiting for her library. On the desk stood a bouquet of wildflowers and a card, signed in slightly crooked handwriting, "We're proud of you, Esperanza." Underneath were the signatures of the entire cleaning staff. Dolores's was, of course, first. Her eyes stung with unshed tears. Esperanza gently touched the petals of the cornflowers and daisies, inhaling their sharp, grassy scent. It reminded her of childhood, the distant village where she and her sister spent their summers with their grandmother, endless fields, bottomless skies, the timeless air. A new life was cautiously, shyly pushing up through the cracked asphalt of the old one. The first weeks in her new position were the hardest. Employees who had grown used to seeing her with a mop and bucket now felt awkward greeting her in the halls. Whispers behind her back, curious glances when she passed. Eduardo pointedly ignored her presence in meetings, addressing only Santiago. But the work, real, beloved work, filled every hollow space. Esperanza analyzed contracts, reviewed agreements, combed through documentation. Her computer soon held a digital library of legal literature that Santiago had ordered just for her. Her old textbooks and reference books moved from her home shelves to her desk. She made a point of staying discreet, avoiding attention, careful not to bruise any egos. When she found issues in the legal department's documents, she didn't bring them up publicly. She quietly passed her notes through the secretary, as if they were simple technical edits not worth discussion. Eduardo accepted them silently, offering no thanks, but also no objections. Slowly, imperceptibly, like spring thaw, the wall of ice began to melt. One day, passing her in the hallway, Eduardo greeted her first. A week later, he came to her office himself to discuss the interpretation of a legal clause. Within 3 months, Esperanza was regularly consulted by the company's legal staff. They came to her with questions, problems, edge cases. Eduardo remained reserved, but professional. And one day, while they were preparing an analysis of a complex, multi-page agreement, he suddenly said, "You have an excellent theoretical background, Esperanza. It's rare to find that in commercial firms." She looked up from the papers, hardly believing what she'd just heard. "Thank you, Eduardo. That means a lot to me. And, by the way..." He cleared his throat, as if preparing to say something difficult. "I'm sorry about that scene in the conference room. I was unfair." That was more than she ever expected. Her phone conversations with her daughter had changed completely. Esperanza now spoke with quiet pride about her work, the projects she was involved in, and how her professional expertise had proven useful to a major company. "Mom, I always knew you were a true professional." Natalia's voice sparkled with genuine joy. "Now that you've got weekends off like normal people, not like in cleaning, you have to visit us more often. The kids miss you." "I'll definitely come." Esperanza smiled, picturing them all together, drinking coffee in that bright kitchen with floral curtains. "How's Carmen?" she asked about her sister. "Tia, Carmen called yesterday. She says she's feeling great," Natalia replied. "The doctor said she's completed the full course of treatment. And guess what? She said she wants to visit you to make sure your new job isn't wearing you out too much." Esperanza laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in a long while, light and free. "Tell her I've never felt better." "And how's Miguel?" "He's deep into entrance exam prep. He wants you to help him get ready for the interview," said Natalia. "He says Abuela knows legal theory better than anyone." There was pride in her daughter's voice. For the first time in many years, Natalia was proud of her mother, just like she had been back when Esperanza was a respected university lecturer. "I'd be absolutely delighted to help," Esperanza replied, and a warm wave of happiness rose from somewhere deep inside her, filling all the empty spaces carved out by years of humiliation and neglect. The evening office was quiet, sinking into twilight. The last employees were leaving, their voices fading down empty corridors that had been full of life just hours earlier. Esperanza was finishing her analysis of another contract when there was a knock on her door. Santiago paused in the doorway, looking unusually unsure of himself. "You're still working?" he asked, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "Just finishing a summary," she replied, instinctively brushing back her hair. "Is something urgent?" "No, nothing work-related." He took a few steps into the room and stopped by the window. "You know, we've worked together so much, but I hardly know anything about you, aside from the fact that you're a brilliant expert, of course." He turned to her, and in his eyes, there was something unfamiliar, almost boyish. "Would you like to have dinner? Something informal?" Esperanza's heart skipped a beat. The last time a man had asked her to dinner. When was it? Before her husband left, more than 10 years ago. A wave of doubt rose inside her. Was this all happening too fast? Was this just another twist of fate, one that would end in disappointment? "This is unexpected," she said, surprised by how nervous she felt. "If it makes you uncomfortable, I understand," he added quickly, and there was a trace of embarrassment in his voice. "I just thought." Esperanza looked at him closely. Over the past few months, she had come to know him better, his principles in business, his attention to detail, his respect for people regardless of their position. Maybe it was worth trusting this feeling that had been quietly growing inside her. "No," she interrupted him. "I'd be delighted," and she smiled openly, without her usual reserve, for the first time in a long while. The restaurant in the old part of Madrid turned out to be nothing like she'd imagined. No gaudy luxury, no ice sculptures or crystal chandeliers. Just a small space in a historic building with stone arches and the soft glow of candlelight on the tables. Quiet music played, and the air smelled of fresh bread and bitter herbs. "I hope you'll like it here," said Santiago, pulling out her chair. "It's one of my favorite places. No business meetings ever happen here, only personal ones." At first, their conversation was a little stiff, but it soon became relaxed and flowed easily. They talked about everything. About books, it turned out they both loved Borges. Santiago reread Labyrinths every year. About travel, he told her about the Galician coast he had visited 3 years ago, and she described a small town in Castile where she had once done her student internship, where a beautiful 19th century theater still stood. "How did you end up in business?" Esperanza asked when dessert arrived. Santiago stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "By accident," he admitted. "I was going to become an academic. I finished law school, entered a doctoral program, and then I met Marina." He paused for a moment. She was striking, vibrant, full of energy. "I fell head over heels. We got married 6 months later. She wanted the good life, fur coats, diamonds, cars. But how can a doctoral stipend pay for diamonds? I started working as a lawyer in a small firm. Then a businessman noticed me and offered me a position at his company. 5 times the salary. I agreed to it for her." He told how he began his career, how he wrote his dissertation at night, which he never defended. Life had taken him in another direction. Then my boss offered to make me a partner and open a joint business. At first things went well, then came the crisis, complications. I was working around the clock, coming home after midnight. And Marina, he gave a dry chuckle with no amusement. She got close to my partner. Said she felt like a woman around him, not a piece of furniture. One day I came home and all her things were gone. A week later I found out my partner had pulled out of the business, taking his share in cash. That must have been hard, Esperanza said quietly. Yes, he replied simply. Betrayal is always hard, no matter who it comes from, a spouse or a business partner. But when it's both, the two closest people in your life. Esperanza nodded in understanding. She knew all too well what it felt like to be stabbed in the back by someone you trusted. I was on the verge of bankruptcy, Santiago continued. But sometimes crisis is a chance to start over. I rebuilt the business, found new investors, changed strategies, and within 2 years, we were making profits we hadn't even dreamed of before. He paused. And 3 years later Marina showed up. Said she'd made a mistake, that she loved only me, that my ex-partner turned out to be a fraud. And what did you do? I refused, of course, he grimaced, as if he'd swallowed something sour. There are things that can't be forgiven. Since then, I've taken relationships and marriage very seriously, and I haven't met anyone I'd want to share my life with. He looked at her closely, as if waiting for her to open up in return. And Esperanza decided to trust him. As for me, she took a deep breath. I've been burned twice. My first husband just left, abandoned me with a 3-year-old daughter. The second one cheated on me, not even discreetly. After the divorce, I thought work would fill the emptiness in my life. And for a while, it did. Lectures, academic papers, students, it all gave me a sense of purpose, of value. But then, she opened her hands, then it was just a mop, a bucket, and glass doors I polished until they shone, just to see at least some result from my work. They talked until the restaurant closed. About childhood, his in a small town where his father worked as an engineer, hers in a communal apartment where 6 families shared one kitchen, and where, despite all the hardships, an incredible warmth and humanity always shone through. 2 solitary souls who had somehow found an unexpected connection in each other. Or maybe, not so unexpected. 6 months had passed since Esperanza became a special legal risk consultant. 6 months of a new life, filled with work she loved, the respect she deserved, and a feeling that had quietly blossomed between her and Santiago, like a flower pushing up through asphalt. After that first dinner, there were other meetings, at the theater, the museum, in Retiro Park, at that same restaurant. Evening walks through the city, long phone calls while one of them was away on business. No one rushed anything, but everyone could see how Santiago's expression changed when he looked at Esperanza, and how her gaze softened when he entered a room. At the company's gala event celebrating the successful launch of the project with Banco Mediterraneo, they no longer hid their closeness. They stood side by side, sometimes touching shoulders, exchanging glances filled with unspoken understanding. "You know, I gave you that document on purpose," said Valentin as he approached, swaying slightly from too much cava. Wanted to test how detail-oriented Santiago really was. I didn't expect he'd have such an ace up his sleeve. You're known in our circles now as the woman who sees everything. Esperanza smiled. Her hand gently brushed Santiago's. There are no coincidences in life, only patterns we're slow to notice. As the guests danced and chatted, the two of them quietly slipped away to the office balcony, a wide terrace on the 12th floor, overlooking the evening city bathed in sunset. The lights below began to flicker on, like stars in an upside-down sky. Santiago wrapped an arm around Esperanza's shoulders to shield her from the cool breeze. "You know," he said, for the first time switching to the informal too, "I noticed you long before that evening with Valentin." "Really?" She turned to him, surprised. "I saw how you arranged the books alphabetically in the 3rd-floor library, how you taught the young cleaner how to handle expensive furniture, how you carried yourself with dignity no matter what. But I didn't dare approach, the difference in status felt too big." "And now?" she asked softly. Now I know that real professionalism and human dignity can't be hidden, and they're worth more than any job title. Esperanza looked out over the city lights, at the darkening sky, at the clouds painted with the last rays of the setting sun. Life had come full circle and returned to her everything it had once taken away: her work, her dignity, her love. "You know, the most important thing is never to lose faith in yourself," she said. "Even when it feels like everything is lost." She turned to him, meeting his eyes in which the city lights were softly reflected. "Thank you for helping me believe in myself again." Santiago gently wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and they stood there for a long time, saying nothing more. Two silhouettes against the backdrop of the evening city, like an illustration of how fate can sometimes take unexpected but beautiful turns, and how a woman of worth deserves not only professional recognition, but also personal happiness at any age. Behind them, the lights of the party flickered, music played, voices murmured. Ahead of them lay the city, glowing with millions of windows, each holding its own story, its own hopes and disappointments. And between the past and the future stood the two of them, two people who had found in each other the reflection of their unfulfilled hopes and a new chance at happiness.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.